Dismissal with prejudice is warranted to ensure the integrity of the judicial system and the efficient administration of justice. Your motion to dismiss with prejudice is granted.
Okay, that's huge news. Okay, so the New Mexico manslaughter case against Alec Baldwin has been dismissed on a Brady violation. Okay, that is the equivalent in criminal law basically to prosecutorial malpractice. Okay, as we know, prosecutors generally have immunity from malpractice. Okay, but this is the closest you can get to malpractice as a prosecutor. And I have to say, I never really liked Carrie Morrissey, and I said this in other videos, but she really has displayed, on top of just making really poor decisions and being really unethical, she really has displayed just an astoundingly bad attitude in court.
Everything that happened in this regard, especially as it pertains to me, needs to come out in the public.
All right, so you're calling yourself as a witness.
And I am, and it was my understanding that the court indicated to me previously that you wanted me to testify. I understand you've now changed your mind. I think it's a good idea if I do it. Where would you like me?
And on top of that, I really do think there are major questions about whether this prosecution should ever have been brought in the first place. Okay, so I think she really had this coming.
The truth of this matter is you don't like Mr. Baldwin very much, do you?
That is absolutely untrue. I actually really appreciate Mr. Baldwin's movies. I really appreciated the acting that he did on Saturday Night Live, and I really appreciate his politics.
You told one of the witnesses who disagreed with you during an interview that you thought Mr. Baldwin was a cocksucker.
I do not recall saying that. I know that that was something that Mr. Baldwin would say on the set of Rust. I don't recall saying that.
Do you deny that under oath?
That's an embarrassing, damning silence. Okay, basically, she's been caught.
Without having more information, I can tell you that I do not recall ever saying that. And if I did say it, I invite you to point it out to me.
You called him an arrogant prick to another witness.
To who? To what witness?
I'm asking you, did you call him an arrogant prick during a witness interview?
I don't believe I did. I don't recall.
Do you deny that?
Without knowing what you're talking about?
Okay, these questions about her bad-mouthing Alec Baldwin and saying bad things about him, okay, to witnesses, this is relevant because it goes to her bias as a prosecutor. Okay, it goes to her motive for what really caused this problem, which is that she wasn't sharing important information with the defense, right? And one of the most important things that Karen Morrissey did is that she tried to argue that these Starline brass reload cartridges that look like dummies, okay, Carrie Morrissey was trying to argue that these weren't relevant, okay, because they didn't come from the Rust set.
Detective Hancock was unable to get those rounds from Mr. Teskey. I did not find that particularly concerning because those rounds had never left Arizona. So ammunition that is in the state of Arizona that has never left Arizona did not strike me that it had significant evidentiary value.
That is an absolutely ridiculous argument. Okay, she is intentionally trying not to see what anybody can see, okay, which is that they're very relevant. Now, they're actually relevant for many reasons, but one of the most important reasons that I didn't hear today, which I thought was extremely relevant, okay, is that I always thought it was very suspicious that when they went to Seth Kenney's offices in Albuquerque to do the search, right, they only found one color primer, that copper primer for his reload Starline brass, right? He had some Starline brass reloads that he says came from some shooting practice with Hannah Gutierrez Reed's dad at the 1883 set in Texas. So when law enforcement did a search of Seth Kenney's warehouse in Albuquerque, okay, they basically were looking at what Seth Kenney presented as ammunition from whatever the target practice or whatever they were doing in the 1883 set, right? And he had some live rounds that looked like a Starline brass dummies, right? And Starline brass doesn't really make live ammunition, so this is very weird, okay? But basically, they just had the copper primers. And this was Seth Kenney's way of trying to suggest, okay, that the live ammunition that he had in his warehouse didn't have anything to do with the Starline brass cartridges that matched the cartridge that actually killed Helena Hutchins. Because the Starline brass cartridges, okay, that looked like dummies but were actually live rounds, okay, these reloads, the one that ended up killing Helena Hutchins actually had a nickel primer. Okay, so this is a question about nickel primers and copper primers or whatever, all these different colored primers.
It was the nickel primer, Starline brass case. And I hadn't really connected the dots that the gentleman that loads these hasn't had nickel primers in 10, 12 years.
How do you know that?
Well, he says he only used Winchester primers.
No. Did you speak to him? How do you know that?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Right after Hancock and I got done with this meeting, I called the gentleman and I asked him, at what point,
What gentleman? Don't use the word gentleman. We need names.
Joe Swanson.
Okay.
Okay. So I called Joe Swanson. I asked him at what point, if he remembered making the reloads for Thale, which he did. I asked him which powders he might have used, and he gave me 2 options, and one of which was Trail Boss powder. And I asked him, I said, well, at what point would you switch between brass and nickel primers? And he said, I wouldn't. And I said, well, why? He said, well, because Winchester stopped making them 10, 12 years ago.
So basically it was Seth Kenney's way of kind of saying, hey, I didn't have anything to do with this because look at my primers, they're a different color. Okay, but of course, if you can show that someone else who had a similar batch from a similar source, okay, if you could show that he actually had different colors of primers, right? Okay, number one, to me, that suggests potentially that maybe Seth Kenney went and sort of like cleaned up his warehouse before, took out like inculpatory evidence before the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office actually did the search of his warehouse, right? That's number one. And why would I say that? Because his friend Sarah Zachary was seen throwing things away, throwing bullets away at the actual scene of the movie set and the Rust movie set, apparently after being on the cell phone talking to Seth Kenney, right? So it's very, very possible that Seth Kenney did the same thing. Basically, he told her on the phone, you get rid of the nickel primers, I'll get rid of my nickel primers, right? And basically, so I leave that open, right? And so it's very relevant.
And you ask a very interesting question, Corporal, that sounds a lot like the question the court just asked you. You ask, do you think it could have come from the same batch since it's a different color, right?
Yes.
And he says, in writing, in no uncertain terms, I thought the same thing regarding the primer, but Joe has been known to mix different color primers and blanks. So no, still highly likely that it's from the same batch. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Okay, look, I don't have the ultimate truth, okay, but it is very clear that Seth Kenney is saying 2 things at 2 different times, okay? When he's being very honest with Corporal Hancock, right, he'll text her and say openly that Joe Swanson's been known to use different color primers, right? So he says that on the one hand. And then when it's convenient in another part of his testimony, he says, oh, he only uses, 1 color primer. He doesn't use 2 color primers, right? And so, I don't know what the truth is, but I think it should be on the table that Seth Kenney may have a motive, maybe to collaborate with this guy, Joe Swanson, and try to come up with a story that tries to make Joe Swanson look innocent, because maybe they know what the real problem is. The real problem is that maybe Joe Swanson, with the assistance, of somebody like Seth Kenney, they've allowed into the stream of commerce, okay, from a company that's not supposed to make live rounds. Okay, Starline Brass is only supposed to make like ornamental rounds, right? They don't really commercialize like in the public. Maybe the owner sometimes will make some reloads, but that company is not really in the business of making live rounds. So if they're putting into the stream of commerce a bunch of live rounds, I bet you they're afraid of being on the hook for maybe like federal firearms charges, from the ATF or something like that. So I could see why Seth Kenney would have every motive in the world, maybe to collaborate with Joe Swanson to try to snuff out this story that he ever used nickel primers. Okay, now the other problem I have with the prosecution is this over focus on the batch of reloaded Starline ammo, okay, that was used at the 1883 set, right, with Hannah Gutierrez's dad, right? Just focusing on that, when I can show you, and I'll prove it to you, that Seth Kenney got another batch from Starline Brass 2 years earlier, okay, and I can prove it, or at least he admits it, right? Okay, so this over focus on the batch that went to the 1883 set, okay, I don't trust Carrie Morrissey focusing on that because there's other Starline brass ammo that was in the stream of commerce. But Carrie Morrissey does ask an important question. She asks about Seth Kenney's involvement in selling materials to Hannah Gutierrez Reed on The Old Way, which is that Nicolas Cage movie.
Did you also supply props and ammunition to the set of a movie called The Old Way?
No ammunition. Blanks and dummy rounds, yes.
Okay, and it's not helpful for him to say he only sold blanks and dummy rounds because the reloads from Starline, they look like dummies, okay? And Starline doesn't sell live ammo, right? So if Starline has live ammo, it's a special batch that's made like homemade, basically, okay? So when this guy says, hey, I only sold dummy rounds, well, that's a problem because what if at your warehouse you had that bad batch? And I will show you that he admitted in his interviews with Corporal Hancock, right? Seth Kenney admitted that 2 years earlier, before the 1883 set, right? Two years earlier, he had another batch of live ammo from Joe Swanson at Starline Brass, okay? So if he says he sold dummy rounds to The Old Way, well, there's a good chance he may have accidentally had some live ammo from the earlier batch. So the reason why I really support the judge's decision today, and I really support it, okay, and I'll try to explain why. It's because to me, Seth Kenney and Joe Swanson are way more culpable in the death of Helena Hutchins than Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez Reed, okay? And I'll try to explain why, okay? Obviously, you should have a better armorer, okay? An armorer should have detected these live rounds, but because they look like dummies and because Starline Brass does not manufacture live rounds, okay, somebody could get caught off guard by those what look like dummies, right? Because they really look like dummies, okay? And so even the best armor, if they're not really on the ball, they could accidentally mistake those things. And I know you're supposed to shake them and stuff, but I'm just saying in the normal work that armorers do, having something that looks like a dummy from a company that doesn't even produce live ammo, okay, it's enough of a chance that I don't know if it meets the threshold for the kind of negligence you need for manslaughter, right? And I think even worse for somebody like Alec Baldwin, because it just wasn't foreseeable, something that bizarre that you would actually have, live rounds that are from a company that doesn't even make live rounds. So when this guy named Troy Teskey shows up, who was trying to offer evidence, okay, to Corporal Hancock, right? This guy, Troy Teskey, he's trying to show that he has a batch that could match what was on the Rust set, right? That would be evidence that there's stuff coming out of Starline Brass, right? Coming into the stream of commerce, right? That could pose a terrible risk to movie sets. If somebody like Seth Kenney sort of passes this stuff through the stream of commerce into movie sets, right? So Seth Kenney is unwittingly part of an accidental release of materials that are not really supposed to come from Starline Brass, right? And that could pose a terrible risk to people on movie sets. So the failure to take Troy Teskey more seriously, okay, even though he was presented as a defense witness, who cares? The failure to take him more seriously, okay, while at the same time, and this is the real problem, being so friendly to Seth Kenney, and I would say overly friendly, okay? I think both Corporal Hancock and, I'm sorry, even the prosecution, I think they've taken this position. They're like friends with Seth Kenney, and that's BS. I'm sorry, because Seth Kenney, I think, is more guilty, okay? I think he is very close to what I think could be federal firearms violations. The Starline dummies, okay, it would be so unexpected. It's so unusual. A lot of people would never expect to have, how would you say, live ammunition with the Starline casing, okay? Because that's just something unheard of unless someone is privately making reloads. And since Starline doesn't have a license, I don't think, to distribute live ammunition, okay, they could be committing federal offenses by putting that into the stream of commerce where it could potentially get into movie sets because it's so easily confusable with dummy rounds. It goes back to Seth Kenney because he probably sold her those dummies while she was working on the Nicolas Cage movie. You see what I mean? So it's this kind of weird web, but Seth Kenney is still on the hook, okay? And so I thought it was really funny how Carrie Morrissey, she was so confident and she thought she was like scoring this major points at trial because she's basically saying, oh, wow, we proved that the canister that came from the 1883 set, that's a red herring and that has nothing to do with the Rust set. But she's forgetting that the dummy rounds that were on The Old Way, the Nicolas Cage movie, those could also have come from Seth Kenney from a different source, okay? And except that source would actually potentially be the actual owner or one of the top guys from actually Starline Brass. So that's a major thing. And I think Carrie Morrissey is really ignoring some major serious stuff, right? That could even be prosecuted in federal court, or could have the ATF involved. And I pointed this out 3 months ago, okay? And I'm going to include some clips from old videos, right? If you want to look at them, where I can show that Seth Kenney had another batch from Starline Brass even 2 years earlier, okay? And that may have leaked into The Old Way, right? So maybe the real source of this stuff is not so much from the 1883 stuff, okay? Maybe that's kind of the red herring. Maybe the real problem is maybe Seth had some old stuff from 2 years ago that leaked into The Old Way, and maybe Hannah by accident brought it into the Rust set. Possible. And of course, Hannah deserves some measure of guilt for that, but how much more guilty is this manufacturer, Starline, from accidentally getting into the stream of commerce the kind of live rounds that they don't even produce commercially, right? That no one would be expecting, that would catch people by surprise, and that could be so dangerous, right? So in my opinion, really, if anything, this dismissal is perfect because it punishes Carrie Morrissey for being too friendly with who is arguably the more guilty person, okay? Has more guilt for why Helena Hutchins died. So if you want to, you can look at these clips. I'm just going to add these clips in, just so you can see what I was talking about this 3 months ago.
So they didn't shake, they didn't rattle. So the one thing is, this is very odd to have live ammo with the Starline. Like, I don't know where you would even find this stuff, right?
Okay, Seth Kenney just lied. That's just a straight up lie. He says, I don't even know where you'd find that. That's just BS. Okay, he is already thinking, okay, and just in a few minutes later, he's going to start admitting some stuff. He does it very carefully, and he wants to keep it he wants to try to keep Joe Swanson like really anonymous at this point. And, I fault the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office, because I think what they should have done, because this is such a high profile case, they should have formed a joint task force with the ATF. Okay. The ATF would have figured out who was much more at fault for this. Okay. Because having a manufacturer leaking out batches of things that look like dummies, that is way more dangerous and way more culpable than just one irresponsible armorer, or one armorer who maybe had some oversight with these particular rounds. So anyway, let's see what he continues to say.
When you asked me, and I said, no, Joe Swanson doesn't sell, he doesn't sell ammo. And it was something I thought about, and then it dawned on me something that happened 2 years ago. So that's what I wanted you to talk to the DA about, trying to keep. I don't know. When I talked to him, in the back of his head, he goes, I wondered.
So here's this jerk. I mean, he's acting like a jerk. He's being all manipulative and ingratiating himself. And he's basically saying, he wants this kept quiet, right? And to talk to the DA, what kind of people are these people in New Mexico? What the hell's going on? Hey, you can do whatever you want to, but get the ATF involved and together decide, what you want to keep quiet, what you don't want to keep quiet, because it's like, who are they protecting? They're protecting somebody that leaked out, really dangerous products that were getting very close to the movie industry. That's super dangerous. All right. So I don't know. Hey, maybe I'm just overreacting, but I don't like, well, hey, look, Seth Kenney can be as slimy as he wants to be, but who is this little girl at the sheriff's office who's like, not even 30 years old, looks like? Is she a person to be making these big decisions? And who are the big shots, on the prosecution side, who are the big heads here making decisions about what's most important? I would say, I'm sorry. I mean, hey, thank you, Seth, whatever. But, the ATF's privately, I'd be thinking we need to set up a task force, because my lights would be going off. This is way bigger than just some little girl armorer. This is a big issue of how this ammo got, this Starline reloads got onto a movie set.
Anyway, if you had some other reloads that had the exact same grain weight of powder, the exact same weight of bullet, and other trace evidence on those bullets, especially this one particular individual, that I hope can remain anonymous.
anonymous. That would be rather telling.
Yeah.
Because there's no
way. They would
there's
really.
no way. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think they'd have to compare it to those, some of the ones that he has.
This is a Crime Circus presentation.
Well, if I told you where it was, right, you talk to the DA and I tell you where it is.
Yeah, I don't even know if that would, necessarily be something that's even brought up, especially if it was done 2 years ago. I mean, ultimately, we look at obviously it's background as to how it got there, which everybody wants to know.
I don't know. I'm just not comfortable with that. I mean, I'm sorry. I just wonder. I wonder if a bunch of ATF agents would feel the same way that this Alex Hancock feels. I just wonder. I wonder if she had a little task force of ATF people working together with her, if they'd be so casual about how dangerous it is to have, Seth Kenney to be having, and he's being so cagey about it. It's like, open yourself up, dude. If you want to be so honest, you talk about, what happened. Tell us more. And also, he's also hiding the fact that he probably went to his office and cleaned out everything he had that was from that batch. I'm pretty sure, And also, I'm pretty sure that Sarah Zachary, she didn't throw the rounds in a garbage can on set. I'm sure she just got them off the set and took them far away. So, I don't know. I think the police, I just think they have their eyes on a couple of people, and, they would just want an easy job, and they don't want to get too complicated, and they're just enjoying their life in New Mexico, eating their burritos and just living comfortable, and, my feeling is that, I'm sorry, I think Alex Hancock and I think the prosecution is just as unprofessional as Hannah Gutierrez Reed. Okay. Now, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, she has to answer for a lot, because I think she really has been sloppy. And I think she was at least a millimeter away from actually being guilty of actual manslaughter. And on top of that, she was probably negligent in other ways that just weren't directly connected to that particular shooting. Okay, so she has a lot to answer for, but I don't know. I think Sarah Zachary has a lot to answer for. And frankly, I think Alex Hancock has a lot to answer for, as well as, the prosecution. And today the prosecution got it. She got, I think, what she deserved. And I think in perspective, I mean, I know, Alec Baldwin's guilty of something. That's why he got sued. All right. Hannah Gutierrez Reed is guilty of something. I don't think it's quite manslaughter, right? I think the real guilty people are, number one, the best friend of the prosecution, which is Seth Kenney, should not have been the best friend. And I'm glad they were punished for it. And then also possibly Joe Swanson, okay, in conjunction. So I think justice was served, except I just think it's a shame that this case didn't go to the ATF to pay closer attention to Seth Kenney and Joe Swanson. That's what I feel bad about. So, was justice served today? I mean, in part. But what's really sad is that more attention hasn't been paid on Seth Kenney, okay, who should never been the friends of anybody. Okay, so thanks for watching, and appreciate your patience.